everyone, welcome to the Northland Artists Conversation. My name is Mark Kelly. I am your host for this episode. Thank you very much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure that you subscribe, also hit the bell icon and flick to all notifications. That would be much appreciated. Today's guest is super amazing. We've had Dr. Maggie Buxton, Maggie, as she likes to be referred to, and on the podcast. Man, she was really, really cool. Going to go to my camera now. It was really, really nice to be able to sit down with her and the depth of knowledge that she has in that brain of hers. You know, she's had some amazing life experiences and she's done a lot of things, and she lives in Whangarei now. She's been here for a number of years, and she's got Awhi World and Creative Technology Northland. And she does really, really wonderful things, some real cutting-edge stuff too. Hearing her talk about sort of growing up in South Auckland, really, really cool. Some interesting stories there too, because she grew up in the Karaka area. So definitely worth having a listen. What else did I get out of that with Maggie? Yeah, I think there were a lot of interesting small points along the way. And then when we got to the end, that was when she's talking about the new innovation that she's doing. I thought that was really, really cool. And so much potential for all artists across the region, but also the opportunity to be able to get amongst something different, step outside your comfort zone. And if you've got something to offer that you may not have shared, this could be the opportunity for you. So I tell you what, how about enough of me waffling on? Let's get stuck into it. Let's sit down and have a conversation with Maggie Buxton.
Any of us.
I know. We all just make it as we go along. I'm just the idiot that sits in the chair that asks the questions of the nice people. Dr. Maggie Buxton, thank you very much for joining us on the Northland Artists Conversation. I really do appreciate it. It's very cool to have you here in this sweltering, stupid humidity at the moment. It's going to be like that today. You're now, when we reached out to you, you were kind of in the throes of getting some stuff ready, which we're going to talk about at the end, because I think, having sort of spoken with you before this, there's some amazing stuff that you guys have just launched, and by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be public knowledge. So it's going to be really, really cool to talk about those initiatives, because that's what we're all about, is supporting initiatives and supporting artists and what they've got coming out. So that's then. This is now, and then let's go way back.
Yikes.
Not that many years, though, because you're younger than 40.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Please come back on our show again.
Okay.
Your upbringing. Now, you're quite a different upbringing, yeah? Tell us a little bit about that, because...
What a launch pad.
What a launch pad. I know, what a leading question,
okay.
Right?
Yeah. So I grew up in rural Karaka, out in a place called Tihihi, actually Kingseat. So
know where Kingseat is. I live there, yep.
Yeah, so did you live there?
I did.
Yeah.
Lovely place.
Kingseat Hospital was where my parents met. And so I grew up in the settlement when Kingseat Hospital was still a thriving institution.
Yep.
And went to Tihihi School, and then went to Rosehall College after that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it was kind of quite a rural upbringing. And then after I went to Rosehall, I went to Auckland Uni and did kind of a BA in politics and education. I was kind of an activist-y type person.
Okay, right, yeah.
Interested in politics, interested in, lots of different things actually. And then after that, did a stint of working in New Zealand, and then worked overseas for a number of years.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of my early work has actually been in people, organisations, community development, professional development, training, kind of all that stuff that's about growing things and people and systems and stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you work in sort of the technology meets creativity space. But when you were going through school, were you've just mentioned that you were quite activist. Were you creative in school? Or was that something that you sort of discovered later on in life?
No, for me, I've always been really creative, and actually my practice is kind of a weird mix between creativity and spirituality. Actually, I've always been a spiritual / creative person from a very, very young age, and so mostly in writing. So I did a lot of writing, poetry when I was young. It was kind of like a little bit like a Wednesday Addams most of my primary school years, which it doesn't endear you, I should say, to your peers in rural New Zealand in the 70s.
No, it doesn't bode well for getting a lot of friends.
A lot of time in the library.
I know. Were you singing the song All By Myself often?
No, just going to beat people off, really.
Right.
But should I say that? Can we cut that,
No,
actually?
No, that's a great line. You are channeling Tim Bell. This is excellent. Tim, mate, love you. Hi, across all the cameras. Sorry. So after you finish beating people off.
I guess lots of... I had a creative bent that happened all the way through... through most of my career, actually. I was always doing some kind of creative craft or photography or poetry, etc., etc. And I guess what happened for me is I lived overseas in Europe for a number of years, and when I was there, I kind of during the day was doing a lot of standard kind of facilitation and training and consulting. Yeah, sure. And in the evening, I was working with a group called FOAM, FO.am, if you look it up. And they're like a cross-disciplinary collective of all sorts of really mad people. And it was, I guess, the underground of Brussels at the time. And I remember there was a particular couple of weeks where something changed inside of me, and I realised that the stuff that I was doing in my main job wasn't as kind of missed out a part of me. Like I was kind of doing it, but there was a part of me missing and part of it. So what I did from that point on was I started integrating my practice, working with place, working with people, changing or shifting consciousness, working with systems and groups. And I started bringing a creative element into it. Now, I guess for me, I've always been fascinated with portals and parallel universes. Okay. So that's kind of a theme in my work. Alternate worlds, parallel universes.
Like Stargate?
I guess a lot of that, Stargate, Star Trek, etc., but a more kind of in all sorts of different senses of the word. And so I got a grant from the European Commission to do research into alternate reality gaming, which was kind of a big deal at that time. Wow. And alternate reality gaming is where it's like a multi-materiality platform game playing mechanism. So you have kind of something online, you might have a phone call in real time, you might have actors in a place.
Yes, now I've heard of this. It's, there was one game that came out, I'm going to show my age here for a second, about 20 years ago, and you logged into a website and you joined, and it asked you to list your phone number and your email address, and you'd go online and play, and then it would be like, wait for the phone call. The awkward thing was that the phone call would come at like 3 or 4 in the morning. It's like, oh, I'm tired. Blah, 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 blah. I don't care. But yes, those things were amazing.
Yeah. So there was it was right at the time where there was a lot of that happening. World Without Oil, I think, I Love Bee. There was a bunch of different ones happening. And so I started researching that practice. Related to that was like participatory theatre. So where the audience and reality kind of blurs, you don't have a theatre walls anymore. Yep. And so what I did was I had to come back to New Zealand around 2008 for various reasons after living in Europe. And I worked with a group in South Auckland, a primary school there, and we actually ran an alternate reality game in the community that we were working in and around a primary school. So we had the police involved and various others. The police came one day with their siren blaring with the CD, because that's all we had. The CD, and shoved the CD into the CD player, and we had all the kids in the hall, and then there was this guy who'd recorded this thing saying, "We are the people of blah blah blah, go to your classrooms, there are mysterious things there," or something similar. And then the kids would go back and they'd find clues, and then for the next 3 months we had artists come in and do talks, and they were appearing through portals. We had kids doing portal investigations where they used maths and did mapping of the portals around the school.
Wow.
They did social studies, which was studying the portal guardians and who were the people that had the values around their neighbourhood. So it was really kind of neighbourhood integration, integrated learning, using alternate reality gaming as a platform. And it was part of a wraparound project that I was doing, kind of a bigger level project with a bunch of other people at the time. So it was like a micro version of that. So that's an example, I guess, of me integrating my practice in a certain sense, that kind of portals, parallel universes, strange different other methods, and then, as I said, kind of building capacity in a neighbourhood as a result. Now,
you came from South Auckland, and when you're driving down the Southern Motorway, the Southern Motorway is a very clear divide. You have Papakura and Drury on one side, socioeconomically challenged.
Yeah, to some extent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I lived in Papakura for a year. Satay Noodle House, represent. And then almost diametrically opposed on the other side is what is now Karaka, which is not socioeconomically challenged, the polar opposite. But when you grew up there, it wouldn't have been like that, would it? It would have been very, very different.
To some extent, I guess when I grew up was the 70s.
It's fine. We'll edit that part.
And I guess for me, it was old farming money versus for me growing up at Kingseat Hospital, it was migrant children and or Māori children from the local marae. And I guess those groups to some extent mingled or didn't.
Yep.
So there was its own class system, I guess, or its own cultural divide. Mm-hmm. And it was only during the time that I was starting to go overseas that they started to have masses of development, and they started selling off those areas and developing and all. But I guess for me, because both my parents were migrants and I grew up in a working class household, in a kind of state house for most of my first 13 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That kind of the kind of difference, the otherness that happens, certainly not to the extent that people, Māori children had or any others had, but certainly I experienced it. And also being an other in terms of the way I thought at the time, that carried through. So I guess my work has always had that theme. It's always been about portals in terms of also bridging between those differences, or opening up, or getting people to see the parallel realities. So it's not just a sci-fi aspect, it's almost like a consciousness aspect, or working with diversity and stuff as well. Because of that background, I guess. And also because, we grew up next to Kingseat, which is a place of others where people are taken and put into another place. Yeah. And in those days, it wasn't people who had necessarily mental illness. It was anyone who defied society's norms, essentially. Yeah. So Foucault, sorry to drop Foucault into it, but he talks about heterotopias, and it was like a heterotopic environment.
Okay. Because the Kingseat Hospital has since become spookers. Am I thinking of the correct?
Not inappropriately. I mean, it was always a very strange energy, to be honest, in the nurses' home. My parents used to work there.
Oh, wow.
My mum used to be a cook. She was a cook, and my dad worked in food there. And so, I used to sit in where Spookers is and watch them cook of an evening after school and stuff like that. So, I was there before Spookers. Yeah. But it's not like it wasn't Spookers in another form before it became Spookers.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, it's funny. One of our other guests that's been on, Aaron, he is the leader, well, he's one of the co-founders of Northland Horror. He used to do these horror events down in the South Island. He said that he shared a story with us where they were doing a horror event in the Dunedin prison. And he said that there were lots of times where you'd hear a knock on the door or the wall and there'd be no one there. And King's Seat has that vibe. I remember walking in there once, and promptly left because there's a real energy in there, and you can definitely feel it.
But also good, and I guess on the other side of things, good times. Like I remember sitting there and having nice smells of food and kindness and lots of unusual people from all over the world or different backgrounds doing their best in challenging circumstances, I guess. But certainly it was kind of a founding ground for me working in the area that I work in. It was always me trying to figure out who I am, how do I fit in the world, and how do I make sense of reality, essentially. So most of my practice is always about bending reality, augmenting reality, changing or moving between realities, and it started in that formed base, I think.
How did you get to there, where you are now, from the activist part in you? Because, I mean, you could say, well, it's a natural progression because, activism, you're trying to change things, and where you are now, you're essentially trying to change things, but in a bit of a different way. So where for you was the change?
I think, for me, for me, activism comes in many forms, and I think you've just kind of described the answer to the question, really. For me, it's how do I make a pragmatic difference in the moment? Mm-hmm. How do I work on myself so I become a difference first and foremost? And then if I work on myself, inner work, then how do I do the world work out there, and how do I make a difference out there at the same time?
Right, okay.
And for me, it's always been about systems. I guess I've always thought in systems, how things are joined up, how things are connected, I guess how do I think about how complex things join together? And I've always been quite a lateral thinker. Like I've always put 2 and 2 together, or 2 and 3 together and make 6 or something. Like I've always seen how things, unusual things connect.
Right.
And so for me, it's working. How do I leverage or work a system to make a difference in some way? And so essentially all of my practice, my whole life, whether I've been paid for it or not, has been some way attempting to make a difference somewhere. Okay. It's always been in some way to do that.
Yeah. So it's essentially what you're doing now is you're just connecting with people in a different way. Nice. Okay. What led you to go overseas? Because you said you went to London and Brussels for a bit, but was it I'm a Kiwi, I'm going to have my OE, or was it there's better opportunities, or what was it for you?
I've been overseas in 2 stints, I think. A relationship, I think, in the first instance. I had a relationship with somebody who was going overseas, and it was an opportunity to go. Mm-hmm. I guess for me also, I kind of have always wanted to travel and meet other cultures because it fits in that realm of things I just spoke about.
Yeah, sure.
And so I ended up living in, I guess, southeast England, London, Brussels for a period of time, and I lived in Scotland, actually, in the Highlands of Scotland for about 5 years as well.
Wow.
At a community called Fintorn, which is like an ecological intentional community.
Okay.
And in and around that community, not necessarily right in it. And so, yeah, it's always been an impulse to kind of be able to meet other people and learn about myself in that process.
Yeah. And obviously connecting with, and I'm guessing that comes from your time in Kingseed around the sort of the melting pot of people, is your desire to go out and learn more, because you've got this small group of people that you've spent time with, and you have those wonderful memories, and everyone sort of around cooking and people, but then you're going out and exploring. Bloody flies. Do you still feel that way now?
Which way?
That you still want to connect with as wide a range of people as possible?
Yeah. I mean, certainly I mean, we get to talk a little bit later about what we're doing now, but things like the labs that we've started doing is all about bringing as many unusual suspects together and getting them to kind of connect. I mean, I'm not sure about my days of travelling. I mean, I've travelled a lot of places compared to most people, and these days it's kind of, it's a strange world to be travelling in.
It's very different. It's very fundamentally different.
Quite different than 30 years ago when you sort of, move across Asia. Most of those places I couldn't go to anymore. But I think for me, it still is trying to connect to lots of different groups.
Yeah.
And Northland is a relatively rich cultural arena, and there's so many people, even in the arts community, and you've personified that with these podcasts, doing such interesting different things, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I think one of the challenges up here is just that a lot of those people are doing them almost in isolation. For reasons to do with funding or geographic issues or cultural issues, etc. They're all operating, often feeling like they're in isolation and there's no one else like them doing stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think if you're like me and a kid growing up, always feeling like you were the one, like a different person that never fitted anywhere.
Yep.
I guess my goal has always been to kind of gather those people up and find a way for them to connect in a certain sense.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that we've always sort of tried to do with the podcast is gather as diverse a group of people as possible. I mean, we've had illustrators, lighting designers, we've had graffiti artists, writers. We had a chef on here last year as well, which was cool. So for us, we take real pride in being as diverse and as inclusive as possible. Not that we want to use those words because they're the catchwords nowadays, but you have to take these small little pockets of people and go, yes, come together, we're all artistic. Let us gather and let us share in the wealth and knowledge. And so, again, you're going to bring your knowledge to this, and when this podcast releases, people are going to be like, oh, wow, okay, didn't know that about Maggie. That's very cool. So who influenced you? Who were the people that made you go, yep, I want to be creative, but then, yep, I want to connect?
I mean, there's a few different people. I mean, for me, there's a few different people that I've kind of had as teachers, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
And certainly some of those are everyday people. I mean, I remember at high school there was a teacher that I had who was a history teacher, and he was kind of an activist-y, kind of very progressive teacher. And I just remember he was like a really big, Eric Anderson actually has passed away now, but he was a really big influence on me. And then just, I think after that I've had a lot of, lucky enough to have a lot of mentors in my life, people who've kind of stepped in different roles and taught me stuff, and also because I've been somebody who likes to experiment and learn, I've also done lots and lots of different kinds of things in terms of learning stuff.
Yep.
So people like Arnold Mindell is an influence for me. He's a kind of he's kind of in the psychology, process-oriented psychology, Jungian, world.
Yes.
I did some short amount of training with him in Portland. I'm just trying to think about people who also, their practice influences. Natalie Jeremenjenko is a cross-disciplinary artist. She's a engineer and an artist, and she does all sorts of different things. Angelo Vermeulen, who's actually kind of a friend of mine who I knew from Foam, and Maya from Foam. The group at Foam, I think, particularly was strongly influencing of me and my practice. People who... Angelo, for example, is an artist, a computer programmer and a biologist by training, and he currently works for the European Space Agency, or has done work on the Mars program.
Wow.
And so for me, it's people who in themselves have a number of different things that they do, and they do them fully. They don't kind of just sit in a box.
Right.
And so anyone in everyday life for me who... even some of the people that we just worked with in Plant Lab, our last project, they're all people who do various things. One of the ladies makes soap and does flower stuff, and she's also a digital artist and taught stuff. My partner has done sketching. Kim, who's a big part of my practice, he did sketching from a very young age and also hacked computers from a very young age.
Right.
And another person in our project, Alan and Viv, he's a ceramicist who does jazz and was a medical researcher.
Yeah.
And his partner's a performer, poet, various other things, who works with him on his projects. So many interesting people who sit outside the boundaries and have fabulous lives. And for me, that's what I aspire to be like that.
One of the organisations that proudly supports the Northland Artists Conversation is Creative Northland. I'm going to take just a moment to talk to you guys about it. Creative Northland have been absolutely vital in helping this project get off the ground through its infancy and all the way through to where we are now. We couldn't have done what we've done without their assistance. What we suggest is that if you're a creative person and you haven't heard of Creative Northland, we highly recommend that you reach out to them. Creative Northland, simply do a Google search. They're the top result. These guys are wonderful. They're all creatives in their own way, and they're all very, very well respected throughout the industry that they work in. They're very hardworking, absolutely committed and dedicated to helping the creative people throughout Northland, whether it be through simple things like starting up a project, all the way through to putting on like an exhibition, for example, all the way through to working out how they can start turning what they do into a business. It's all free advice. They give really, really good guidelines and helpful assistance to make sure that you, as a creative, are able to get the most out of what you do. Creative Northland, highly recommend them. Check them out. So, having such a diverse range of people that have influenced and mentored you, in what way do you think that's affected how you do that for other people? Start off with a heavy question.
I think for me, I've always been lucky to have a great deal of generosity in terms of people kind of supporting me and sharing their wisdom with me, and I've also been given a huge amount of opportunities. Just good synchronicities and leading one thing to another. And I've always, because I have quite a strong kind of spiritual base in terms of my practice generally, I guess for me it's always about giving back.
Right.
So for me, if I have the opportunity to support somebody or provide some advice or do things for my community, and then for me it's about giving back something about what I've been given. So in terms of mentoring or coaching or whatever stuff I've been doing, I think it's just about kindness and generosity. It's not about the content more than anything else. But anyone who's watching this who knows that if they ask me something or they want my advice, I give it.
Right, okay.
And sometimes I give it if it's not asked.
Oh.
A little bit.
Okay.
And also I'm a very straight person. Like I'm a very clear and straight person in terms of how I do things. I tend to just go, okay, blah, 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 that this is how it is.
Yep.
You take from that what you need to.
Yes.
And I've always been, I guess, because I've done a lot of work on myself and done a lot of training in different kinds of practice or, self-improvement things or group facilitation things and stuff, I'm really big on people taking self-responsibility. So for me, I take responsibility for my actions. And if I work with somebody, then I imagine that they will do the same, and I'm supporting them to do that.
Right,
and
okay.
I'm helping them to be the best thing they can be and stand on their own feet around stuff.
Yeah. So you're not sort of mothering people, holding their hands and sugarcoating things. It's very... this is the information that you're going to require. How you interpret that information is up to you. Something
like that, although probably I can be a little mothering sometimes.
There's nothing wrong with that though, is there?
Sometimes a little bit. Generally speaking, I tend to be a little bit of a straight person. I just say how it is. But, as you get older, I hate to say that phrase, it just becomes tiring to kind of, it's just easier just to be clearer.
Yeah.
And I think in the arts area, sometimes we need that a bit. I think.
Agreed.
We need to be just kind of a little bit more straight up and a little bit more, let's just get things done kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, that is going to lead into my next question. Now, you've got, you're someone that's obviously gone out and done a lot of things on your own. Have you always been someone that's gone, I've got an idea, I'm going to seek approval? Or have you been I've got an idea, I'm just going to do it and see what happens?
Most of the time I do something and then apologise later.
It's better to ask for forgiveness and beg for permission.
That's pretty much that. Although I tend to be, I think also though I temper that a little bit because I like to get I do a lot of consulting, but in a true sense. Like I like to find out, what do you think about this idea? How would this work, do you think, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Not asking permission per se, but just kind of testing the waters with lots of different people, getting a sense of buy-in, feeling like people are kind of on board around that, but certainly not going to, institutions or whatever and saying, hey, is it okay if I do blah, blah, blah? Otherwise, most of the stuff I do, I would not have had done. They'd have just gone in there and they'd have said, no, we're doing it instead, or don't do that, or no, you can't do that because it won't work. And then I'm like, okay.
As a creative person and someone who deals with technology, and by all accounts, you're sort of certainly someone that pushes the envelope in terms of, I guess, standard creative practices. What resistance have you met along the way, and sort of how do you navigate that?
I guess I'd also shout out to Kim and that, and so we're partners in some of that madness. I think for me, it's always been about challenging people's perceptions. And if you're working thematically with things like portals and parallel universes and alternate worlds, which I am, you're never going to do stuff that's straight, right? It's never going to be. It's always going to be using unusual technologies and in different other places, or doing something that's a little bit different in a different other place. By nature of the theme, I think it asks you to kind of do different other kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, also because I'm just somebody who's always wanted to learn ever since I was young. I'm quite hungry for learning.
Okay.
And that's never stopped. So it's like, okay, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. There's a random bunch of cables over there. What could we do with that stuff? Or,
right, yeah.
Mark has some other business doing IT. What crap could I get for free off him on the side?
Bit of stuff.
It's like, what can be done here? What's the possibility is always my question. With that overriding thing of, okay, I've got a spiritual practice. I'm interested in the spirit of place. I'm interested in supporting things that are seen and things that are unseen. I'm interested in kind of people connecting across other different realities. That's always going to lend itself to doing a different kind of practice, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're probably the fourth or fifth guest that we've sort of had in where they've talked about seeing things from their own unique perspective, and I think that's very important. What you and I see might be very different. You talked about the pile of cables. You look at the pile of cables and go, what can I create with this? I look at the pile of cables and go, that's a mess. And then I've got to cable tie it all up and label it and stuff like that. But I imagine having that, and you mentioned it before, you have a very lateral way of thinking, 2 + 5, 3 = 6. How has that fared for you, sort of, as you've moved along this creative technological journey that you've been on?
I think good. It wasn't so good when I was doing mainstream consulting overseas.
Right.
Working for a big multinational and things like that. I never really fitted in that environment.
Right.
And so I think when I had the opportunity to move into working for myself most of the time, and B, working in much more creative spaces and spaces that I create myself, it was a relief, probably for me and the people who tried to employ me. So, so I think, in terms of how it's fared for me, it's interesting. And even within the creative tech, interarts, digital arts field, Kim and I in Afi World and also, I guess, in my practice, still aren't quite, we're still not quite, it's a very ungenreable area anyway, right? So we're not very fine arts. We're not doing like things for the sake of it in a gallery, for example.
Sure, yeah.
We're also probably not very highly commercial, like some of the studios who purely do commercial gigs. They go and do big things for museums, or they do large installations so that a soft drink company can launch a product. Tend not to do that either. Most of the stuff we do is community based. It's usually grassroots. It's usually got some kind of environmental, political, economic base.
Yep.
It's usually working with partners who are capacity building organisations in a community or region. And so it kind of tends to be almost like community arts, but with a kind of creative tech, experimental tech focus, which is a bit unique in New Zealand particularly.
I would agree, and I think especially because tech is always evolves, and evolves at such an exponential rate. The tech that you're using 2 years ago for some kind of, the art installation, that you might look at the same tech 2 years later and it's changed and is different, and you might go, well, we're going to do something that's just so left field of that instead.
Yeah. And that's certainly happened with things like augmented reality. I mean, everyone wants to do something with that, and we're just like, we've done, I think, 15 projects, maybe 20 between Kim and myself.
Oh, wow.
I did my PhD in AR back in 2011, and now I'm like, it's great, it's interesting,
yes,
cool stuff, that kind of stuff, but it's kind of caught up. And look, since Pokemon Go happened, I'm like, God,
Pokemon Go.
I can't. But there's lots of interesting stuff all the time, and really clearly for most people who watch this, actually my practice isn't tech. I'm not a hard coder. I don't, I work with other people to do that, including my talented partner and others. I, as a practitioner, I'm a place-based practitioner, and I work across disciplines to do that.
Yep.
And because I'm interested in portals and parallel realities, of course AR was going to be one of the first tools, and of course I did my PhD in it, right?
Yep.
Because it's literally an alternate reality or parallel reality tool.
It is.
And a very quick and dirty one to do that.
Yep.
But tech changes all the time, and so it's not about the tech for me, it's about what's the environment, or what's the ideas, or what's the systems that are changing.
Okay.
And it might be that I evolve out of doing stuff that's in creative tech per se and move more into some other disciplinary practice. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah. Okay.
But certainly it's not a tech thing per se. It's more about the kind of the cross-boundary practice.
Yeah. And as you said, it's ungenreable.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense, because it's not like, you could sit there and say, I write a book. Okay, well, you're a writer. It's like, I deal with creative technology. Sure. What the hell does that mean?
That's right. I like portals and parallel universes.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yes. That must make you a portalist.
So it must make you friendless.
Makes you Wednesday Addams.
That's right.
And it's funny because I have a VR set inside, and I use it to play Star Wars Jedi Challenges. That's amazing. Nice. It's the best thing in the world. I get to be a Jedi. But now, you mentioned Awhi World. I'm dying to talk about Awhi World and the creative technology lab that you guys do, because you and Kim obviously work quite closely, hand in hand, but are still independent as well. So let's talk about Awhi World first, because that's something that sounds hugely fascinating.
So Awhi World actually was formed in that project I mentioned a while ago in South Auckland.
Yes.
And then I formed the company after I finished my PhD, and it was originally going to be postdoctoral research, actually. It was just going to be kind of a way to do my research and practice.
Oh, wow.
It was a vehicle for my practice.
Yeah.
But actually it's turned into kind of my thing that I do over the last, it's 2014 that I started it. Awhi World is a creative innovation studio, and we essentially support the spirit of place, connect communities. Parallel universes and portals are our speciality, is our tagline. And we've done, I think, a lot of projects. I mean, if you look at our website, I've lost track of them. We do innovation labs, pop-up innovation labs.
Yep.
We do large-scale, town-wide projects. We've done a few of those using augmented reality and designed apps for that. We do partnerships with schools to get people connected to place in that way.
Oh, wow.
We've done projects with Pacific Island groups, cultural groups, multicultural groups. We've done installations of different kinds, interactive installations, so a lot of stuff that essentially the goal of it is about connecting people to the place, supporting the spirit of place, bringing disparate people together and supporting innovation essentially as an energy.
Yeah.
It's about getting people to think differently about themselves, their environment, connect to the environment, that kind of thing.
People can just come along to Awhi World and be part of it? How does it work?
We tend to have several projects we do a year.
Okay.
Those are pretty much always public-facing projects. And so we are always looking for really cool collaborations, community groups, environmental groups, etc., who have a solution or they want to have, or a problem they want to solve, I should say. And we collaborate with them. We bring in other individuals if we can, so we can mentor and connect with other people. So they're usually collaborative enterprises of some sort.
Nice.
And then, as I said, they're usually public-facing in that way.
Okay.
We'll probably talk in a minute about a big project that we're about to start. Maybe we'll do that now.
Let's do that now. Here we go, because this is the really exciting one. I think us having spoken about this before we started doing the podcast, I think this is the one that's going to be really, really interesting. And this is such an amazing project to Taitokoro. So go for gold.
So we're launching the Awhi Incubator, and essentially what it is a year, just over a year-long project. And the goal is to raise the Te Taitokoro's profile in this kind of semi-ungenreable area of creative tech, inter-arts, cross-disciplinary practice, digital arts area.
Yep.
Loosely held. And it's really to mentor and coach and support Awhi, a group of individuals particularly, to realise their projects or their dreams in that area, to build their practice in many ways. And that could be simply helping them research a particular thing or get to the first stage of prototyping something. It's not you don't have to solve the world out of it, but it's to get people to the next stage.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of it, particularly around raising that profile, is to partner with national and international groups to get people showing their work or having platforms that are outside of our region. Certainly we're setting up regional platforms as part of that, labs, potentially symposiums, etc. But it's really partnering with those other groups so that their work and their practice can be seen outside of here, and we can be seen from the outside in as a centre of excellence, a centre of innovation. We're very kindly funded by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage's Innovation Fund.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so lucky to get that funding. And that's going to go towards labs, workshops, and also coaching, group coaching and resources, and really giving people some support, sort of in a group of people, some support in terms of supporting their practice, both professionally, maybe in terms of marketing and things like that support, but also generically, and working with groups who are doing that or putting them in touch with those groups, but also working with them particularly around creative tech to support their skills. And the projects will generally have that as a base. Like, I want to learn how to do an interactive thing here. I want to research how to do Internet of Things. I want to do AR, learn how to do augmented reality, etc., etc. It's to kind of get people into that place. It's not doing the projects for them. It's kind of supporting them to be able to do that for themselves and getting stronger skills. And in that process, also building more of a cohort in the region around that.
Yeah, sure,
and
definitely.
So the call out for that will happen probably sort of March, April. We just literally started the project yesterday. So we're just in the process of building the infrastructure and getting the stuff to launch and things like that. But on top of the fact that we're working with this group, there's actually a looser group that we're going to be working with who can come. Some of those workshops will be public workshops or peer workshops. The labs certainly will be available for the public to come into and practitioners to be part of. So while there's kind of one group we work with kind of more intensively, there'll be other groups we work out with in concentric circles outwards. So we're hoping to touch as many people as possible, and certainly work with individuals who are connected to networks. I guess that comes back from my systemic thinking practice or community development practice.
Yeah.
If you work with a lone practitioner, that's great. If you work with a practitioner who's part of an organisation or a group, and you ask them as part of being part of the incubator to then give a workshop back or a podcast or a webinar back to that group, then that group benefits from them being part of it. Then we spread the word in a ripple, essentially.
Definitely.
I can't announce it yet, but we have got some international and national partners on board who are
brilliant.
Interested in kind of supporting us to be part of their expos or part of their projects, etc.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of providing a portal for people out of the region to, first of all, connect with each other, but secondly, connect overseas. And there's kind of a strong link between that and Creative Technology Northland, which is a group that that Matt Keane and I founded 2018.
Yeah.
And that group, some of you will know, is a kind of capacity building group as well. It's about a networking group for all the ungenreable, in-betweeny types and those interested in that stuff. And kind of there'll be some crossovers between that. So, for example, some of the workshops that we're running, we can post onto the Creative Technology Northland website, spread it around the region, etc. So there won't just be exclusive groups for the people as part of the podcast. And it just means that, particularly Kim and I, but also a group of other people are able to even better support our peers and enable our peers. And also, the funding that we get, we're hoping to really spread through in terms of suppliers who are working in our field, like getting people to support other people through that funding.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's really exciting. I'm really happy. All the feedback we've got so far in terms of consulting with as many people as possible is really excited, and really hoping we get a great group of people apply when we put the actual expression out.
Yeah, definitely.
And certainly, even if people apply and they're not living in the region, for example, but are connected here, or for some other reason it doesn't fit for them to be part of the incubator, there's so many opportunities for people to be part of it and learn new skills and connect to one another that it doesn't matter. The incubator is kind of an incubator for the ungenreable practice we have on a regional level, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, you certainly hit the nail on the head as a sort of an outsider that's sort of hearing about this. You're not limiting it to taitokoro. It's like, yes, I guess the sort of the day-to-day labs and things like that will be here, but it's basically elevating that to the world and then going, look at what we can do, and then having the world come in and go, oh, that's quite interesting.
Literally the partners we're dealing with, one of them is it's an international agency. So I think it's how do we, and even just having an article about what we're doing on an international website to a whole group of professionals in Europe, for example, means that we're one step closer to people actually taking ourselves seriously, and other regions in New Zealand taking us seriously. And it's not just about arts. Let me just have a tiny rant, Mark.
Go for gold. Rant away. Well, it's not a rant. You're just talking. We're just talking.
One of the things that's a bugbear for many of the people probably watching this is that quite often large organisations locally, won't name any names, will procure creative tech or individuals outside the region because they don't take us seriously enough to think that we've got professionals who can do it. And I mean creative tech across the spectrum. People like yourselves who do cinematography or whatever, animators, people who are doing interpretive installations at museums up here, etc. People building apps, etc. Even websites. I mean, some of the biggest institutions here go to Christchurch, for goodness sake, to get their website done. Or hire people from Auckland to come and do their promos.
Okay.
That for me is not good enough. That's just not good enough. We have the professionals here who can do that.
We do.
And we just need to be, if we can work really smartly, and including all sorts of groups, not just Creative Tech Northland, but Freelance Network or Game Developers Network. If we can work smartly and connect with one another, we can form those groups that then can be seen professionally to do that work. And that's what I'm passionate about. Let's have local support local and connect with one another and raise Te Tautokoro to where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And is already. We just need everyone to see it.
I don't know really where to go from that. That's amazing, though. That's very cool. And it definitely raises some very valid points. and definitely should spark some conversation as well, because, as a region where, what are we, like 60, 70,000 strong, spread over a large geographical basis, but with lockdowns, we all proved that we can work digitally and from home. So why can't we continue to collaborate and create together in that environment, but embrace the people that we have around us? And that's what we at the Northland Artists Conversation want to do. We want to celebrate the huge depth of talent that's in the region. So on that note, Maggie, it's so weird. You're Dr. Maggie Buxton with the letters after your name, but you're Maggie and you're cool.
Just
So
Maggie,
you're welcome. Maggie, thank you very, very much for coming in and sitting down with us. Our listeners and viewers always get a lot out of all of these podcasts, because we actually get to see the people behind the face or the name or the reputation, so we get to learn about people. So on behalf of the team, I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming in and sitting down with us.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Man, I tell you what, so you guys are you've obviously just seen the podcast with Maggie Buxton, which was great. I was just quickly talking with producer Andrew about some of the silly things our kids say when they're younger. My son said sausage, and Andrew's son said jodgage, which it's hilarious. Kids are just so amazing. Swing to my close up now. Man, Maggie. She a really, really fascinating person with a depth of knowledge, and I said that at the start as well. She is one of those people that is just, by talking with her, that there is a wealth of information, and she is someone that is willing to share it all with people. If you get involved with anything she does, she's one of those people that will embrace you coming in and will impart as much knowledge on you as she can, whilst also receiving new knowledge as well. And I think the big thing for me that I took away out of the whole podcast was it's in the last third. Have a listen to her talking about Afi World, and the new incubator the incubator lab that she's got coming up. Because honestly, we hear artists talking with absolute passion all the time, and she was no different. Man, there is going to be some really, really cool things. And as a group of people in Te Taitokoro, something like this is something that we should nurture and support, because this is going to be good for the region as a whole, good for creatives as a whole as well. So Northland Artists Conversation is definitely going to be getting behind that and supporting it as much as possible. So where can you, the listener or viewer, hear this amazing podcast? Well, for the visuals, you will find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And for audio, you will find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. All great platforms, all really, really easy to get to as well. The other cool thing is, if you're listening or watching this and you are a creative person, or you know someone who is a creative person and they haven't been in the podcast studio yet, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear from anyone that's a creative, because for us it's about speaking to as many people as possible. So if you're not on our radar, we want to hear from you. So you can reach out to us by emailing us hello@northlandartistsconversation.co.nz. Super simple. We keep everything as simple as possible. The other thing we have is we have a Patreon page as well. That's where supporters of the podcast can give a little bit more. We have two tiers. The first tier we have is $5. It's called Cup of Coffee. And that's just a way of saying, thanks very much for your support and appreciate what you're doing. The second tier we have is Coffee Addict, and that's $20 a month. Cool thing with that tier is you do get a couple of extra perks that you don't get with the Cup of Coffee tier. So the first perk you get is we will give you a shout out on the podcast, and that's guaranteed no matter what. The second thing we'll do is we're going to put notices up as well to say, hey, look, this is who we've got coming up. you have to register with Patreon, and you need to have an account, and then it's super simple. You can find us by going to www.patreon.com/Northland Artists Conversation. That's Patreon, or Google us, or Google Patreon, Patreon, and then once you've created your account, go to the top right-hand corner, type in Northland Artists Conversation. You'll see us there with a very, very top result. I think we're the only result, to be fair. And then pick your tier and go for gold, because, we would love to have as many supporters as possible. We've been doing this now for 8 months, and we've had a lot of success, and we continue to have success and growth, and we appreciate every single one of you that watches and listens to what we do, whether it's leaving a comment on a YouTube clip, or a comment on Facebook or Instagram, or even if you write a review through Apple Podcasts as well. Every little bit helps. What that does is that helps the algorithm push us higher up as well, because the more people we can get in front of, the more success we have. The more success we have, the more we can continue to do this as well, and that's what we love. We love supporting all of the amazing and talented artists in Northland. So I'm going to go to my wide shot now. Guys and gals, thank you very, very much for tuning in to the Northland Artists Conversation on behalf of the team and myself. Thank you very much, and we will see you guys real soon.